Today is Pokemon Day, and what better way to celebrate than with a new TCG announcement? Mega Pokemon are returning to the Pokemon TCG, and the new mechanic is different than the old mechanic, and in this video, I'm going to talk about the implications of the new Mega Pokemon EX and what it means for the future of the Pokemon TCG. In today's announcement, both Mega Lucario EX and Mega Gardevoir EX were revealed, along with their HP, attacks, and the fact that they give up 3 prize cards when they get knocked out. Mega Lucario EX has 340 hit points and 2 attacks. Its Aura Jab attack costs 1 fighting energy, does 130 damage, and allows you to attach up to 3 basic fighting energy cards from your discard pile to your benched Pokemon in any way you like. Then its second attack, Mega Brave, costs 2 fighting energy and does 270 damage, with the classic drawback that next turn you can't use Mega Brave. This little fighting Gatorade thing was also revealed. It's an item card that makes it so your fighting Pokemon do 30 more damage during the turn it was played, and it stacks, so it's basically a fighting version of Electro Power. So that's pretty cool. Mega Gardevoir EX has a record-setting 360 HP and 2 attacks as well. Its Overflowing Wishes attack costs 1 Psychic Energy and says for each of your bench Pokemon, search your deck for a basic Psychic Energy and attach it to that Pokemon. And then Mega Symphonia also costs 1 Psychic Energy and does 50 damage for each Psychic Energy attached to all of your Pokemon. It's also worth noting that these Pokemon just evolve from their pre-evolutions like Pokemon EX, except they're Megas. So Mega Lucario EX evolves from Riolu, and Mega Gardevoir EX evolves from Kirlia. Before I get into my breakdown on the new Mega mechanic, I want to take a moment to thank my sponsor, Dragon Shield. Dragon Shield makes the highest quality sleeves and accessories for your favorite tabletop games, like the Pokemon TCG. My favorite sleeves are the Dragon Shield Black Matte, Pink Diamond, Blood Red, and Non-Glare Mattes. Those are the ones that I make sure to keep stocked up in my studio for everyday play. Dragon Shield sleeves are durable and tough while providing an unmatched shuffling experience. They also come in a huge variety of colors to match your favorite decks, which you can see over at dragonshield.com. So head over to dragonshield.com today and place an order for your favorite color of Dragon Shield sleeves. You can use the code TRICKYGYM at checkout for 5% off your order. Again, that's dragonshield.com for all the best sleeves and accessories for your favorite tabletop games. Huge thanks to Dragon Shield for being a continued sponsor of the channel. So yeah, this is the return of the 3 prize card mechanic. And honestly, I was hoping that Pokemon would never go back to a 3 prize mechanic after the VMAX era, which followed the tag team era. It seems like Pokemon just can't help themselves, and when it comes to printing 3 prize Pokemon, they love it, but I don't. And the reason that I don't love 3 prize Pokemon in the Pokemon TCG is that they award half of the game's prize cards when they get knocked out. So they just, by nature, unnecessarily speed up the pace of the Pokemon TCG. And standard format is already in a really fast and aggressive place right now, where games are often won in just a few turns. You take 2 prizes on turn 1, another 2 on turn 2, and then 2 more prizes on turn 3, and the game is over. It seems as if Pokemon has kind of thrown card design to the wind lately, and is really just all about printing big numbers on their marquee cards, which is unfortunate for us as players. A game where all the biggest Pokemon just one-hit KO each other is not actually all that fun to play, because it just rewards the player that sets up first, and there's not really any room to outmaneuver your opponent since you're just trading back and forth and racing to the finish line. Now, when there's comeback mechanics that can make things a little bit more interesting, but with the introduction of Fezandipity EX, comeback mechanics have largely been erased, since Fezandipity EX is like a 1-card board position that allows you to pretty much always draw out of a low hand size. Anyways, let's compare the new Megas to the old Megas and talk about the trends in card design over the years. The original Mega Pokemon EX from the X and Y block were kind of awesome and also kind of terrible. Some of them were good. Mega Audino EX won Worlds, of course, but I don't think that necessarily means it was a good card. Primal Groudon and Primal Kyogre EX were both pretty decent. Mega Rayquaza EX was probably the best Mega Pokemon during this time. And as far as their power level goes, they had about 30 to 50 more hit points than their regular EX counterparts, which they evolved from, and in order to evolve from the regular Pokemon EX, you had to end your turn when you evolved into a Mega Pokemon EX, unless you had a Spirit Link attached to that Pokemon EX when you evolved, which allowed you to evolve normally without ending your turn. And as far as the attacks on the original Mega Pokemon EX, most of the best ones were not easily one-hit KOing each other. The Mega Pokemon EX that could one-hit KO each other, like the Dragon Mega Rayquaza EX with its Dragon Ascent attack, which did 300 damage, were basically unplayable because the attacks were too difficult to pull off. Primal Groudon EX had the Gaia Volcano attack, which could one-hit KO some things, dealing 100 damage plus 100 more damage if you discarded a Stadium card, and then with Strong Energy attached, you could do 20 more damage, so it was possible to hit one-hit KO numbers with Primal Groudon EX, but that attack was so difficult to power up that you had to sit behind walls while you spent your entire game attaching energy to Primal Groudon EX, and then you could eventually bring it into the active spot and start swinging. So it was by no means taking quick, efficient one-hit KOs. After looking at the original Mega Pokemon EX, it's super clear that the game designers wanted to keep these cards in balance with the rest of the format. The Mega Evolution rule, which makes you end your turn if you evolve it, really slows these cards down. Or you have to find a specific Spirit Link for the Mega Pokemon you want to evolve and attach it to your Pokemon EX before you evolve it, which clutters up your deck. The game designers made it so that the original Mega Pokemon EX were not just easily one-hit KOing each other back and forth, and these Mega Pokemon EX only gave up 2 prize cards. The 2 new Mega Pokemon EX revealed so far both have a record-setting amount of hit points and do an incredible amount of damage for a very low amount of energy. Mega Lucario EX is now the largest Stage 1 Pokemon ever released with 340 HP, and Mega Gardevoir EX is the largest Stage 2 Pokemon with 360 hit points. There's no sort of Mega Evolve rule or stipulation that holds these cards back from coming into play early, so you can use Rare Candy to evolve Mega Gardevoir EX into play on the second turn of the game. And with a card like Salvatore, you could actually get a turn 1 Mega Lucario EX and use Aura Jab on the first turn of the game to accelerate 3 energy into play, and then Mega Brave on turn 2 for 270 damage. But wait, if you play the new Gatorade thing, you could actually do 300, 330, 360. Why not 390 damage on the second turn of the game? Sure. Now, I don't want to be all doom and gloom here. I mean, I think that these Mega Pokemon EX are probably going to be better designed than Tag Team Pokemon, which were the biggest Pokemon ever created in the Pokemon TCG and were also basic Pokemon. So at least these guys have to evolve. And then I also think that these Mega Pokemon EX are probably going to be more creative than the Pokemon VMAX that existed during the Sword and Shield era, since those Pokemon evolved from regular Pokemon V, which were all pretty much terrible and huge liabilities while they were in play, waiting to evolve into their VMAX counterparts. These Pokemon just evolve from regular Pokemon, so at least you don't have a huge liability in play while you're waiting to get your huge bloated Pokemon Mega Evolution EX into play. Another thing I want to talk about is power level disparity, and I feel like the Pokemon Company has kind of lost the plot when it comes to balancing non-rule box Pokemon with their rule box Pokemon. For reference, a rule box Pokemon is any card that has a special rule box on it, usually a Pokemon EX or a Mega Pokemon EX, denoting that it gives up multiple prize cards, but there's been a bunch over the years. The very first rule box Pokemon were Pokemon EX from the 2000s, and these cards really played harmoniously with their non-rule box counterparts, and a large part of that was there wasn't a lot of power disparity between the cards. Swampert EX, for example, has 150 hit points and can do up to 100 damage with its Hyper Pump attack for 5 energy. Swampert from Ruby and Sapphire has 110 hit points, a nice ability that accelerates energy into play, and does 50 damage while inflicting sleep for 4 energy. Swampert EX's Hyper Pump does 80 damage for 4 energy. So Swampert EX has just 40 more HP than the regular Swampert, while giving up an additional prize card when it gets knocked out. Swampert EX's attacks are powerful, but not powerful enough to easily one-hit KO other Stage 2 Pokemon EX. Taking a look at another example, Gardevoir EX from Sandstorm has 150 hit points, just like Swampert EX, and can actually take some pretty big knockouts with its Psystorm attack. Psystorm does cost 4 energy and does 10 damage times the total amount of energy attached to all Pokemon in play. So your opponent does have some ability to play around that by limiting their energy in play, but the big check on Gardevoir EX is that it has 2 weaknesses. It's weak to both Grass and Psychic, so Gardevoir EX does have that to keep its power level in check. Gardevoir from Ruby and Sapphire has 100 hit points, so just 50 less than its EX counterpart, and the powerful Psyshadow Pokepower, which accelerates 1 energy per turn from the deck to one of your Pokemon at the cost of putting 2 damage counters on that Pokemon. And then Energy Burst does 10 damage times the total amount of energy attached to Gardevoir and the defending Pokemon. During the first EX era, it was super common to get your single prize Pokemon and your multi-prize Pokemon EX interacting with each other, attacking into one another, and trading prizes, while not always one-hit KOing each other, which made the games really interesting. And part of what makes that dynamic so interesting is that the cards aren't that far apart in their power level. All right, now let's fast forward to 2025, where Gardevoir EX has 310 hit points and can accelerate an infinite amount of energy from the discard pile into play every turn with its Psychic Embrace ability. Just like the original Gardevoir from Ruby and Sapphire, you do have to place 2 damage counters on your Pokemon when you accelerate that energy. But those 2 damage counters are a far lesser percentage of these modern Pokemon's hit points than they were back then. And Gardevoir EX has 160 more HP than the single prize Gardevoir. That is over double the HP total of the non-rule box Gardevoir, which is a far cry from the 50 additional hit points that the original Gardevoir EX had over Gardevoir from Ruby and Sapphire. And then you look at Mega Gardevoir EX, which has 210 more HP than the single prize Gardevoir from Silver Tempest, and it's pretty evident that there's just no point in playing with these single prize Pokemon. In fact, the game designers are forcing our hands into playing exclusively with the new Rulebox Pokemon since they outmuscle the non-Rulebox Pokemon by such a high degree. And it really hasn't always been that way. As recently as the early Sun and Moon era, Rulebox Pokemon were coexisting and being played alongside their non-Rulebox counterparts in almost every meta deck. But then with the introduction of Tag Team Pokemon GX, the very first 3 prize Pokemon, that harmony got completely upended. Tag Team Pokemon GX were basic Pokemon that had as much HP as the Stage 2 Pokemon during that time, and then the Pokemon Company had to one-up tag teams, so they introduced VMAX Pokemon in the Sword and Shield era and just absolutely shattered the 300 hit point ceiling that the Pokemon TCG had seemed to abide by leading up to it, and now we've got Pokemon that are creeping up on 400 hit points here in the Scarlet and Violet era. In the last handful of years, the Pokemon Company has exponentially ramped up the power level of their Rulebox cards while increasing the power level of their non-Rulebox cards at a much slower rate. And in my opinion, that disparity in power level makes the game overall less enjoyable to play. Power creep is a natural consequence of any trading card game existing over a period of time. Game designers have to figure out how to constantly reinvent their game while keeping it feeling familiar enough that fans will want to come back and continue playing. How do you make a game that has existed for 30 years feel fresh and new while also making it feel comfortable and familiar? I'm not one to gripe about power creep. I get it. You want to sell your booster packs, and kids like big numbers. But I do think that there's a point where if you power creep your game enough, it does become kind of unrecognizable to the game you started with. And I think that Pokemon is somewhat going through that right now, as are many of the other major trading card games that have existed for nearly 30 years or 30 plus years like Magic the Gathering. So I'm going to pose this open-ended question, and feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments below. How long can a trading card game continue to power creep itself while continuing to be that same game? The 3 major trading card games, Pokemon, Magic, and Yu-Gi-Oh!, have all been at it for about 30 years, and the games have changed considerably since those base sets all the way up until now. So then, what will these games look like in another 30 years if game design continues on a similar trajectory? And what will these games look like in 100 years? Will they be recognizable as the games that we started with in the 90s? Or will the games kind of morph and change into something totally different over a long period of time? Fortunately for Pokemon, it doesn't really matter what the cards do, because the characters are so popular that the cards will continue to sell anyways. And I have a suspicion that the bigger the numbers on the cards, the better they sell. So then that means that it's only a matter of time before we get our first 1,000 hit point Pokemon. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you next time. See ya.